At 11:14 on a freezing Tuesday night, I was mopping the 42nd floor of Apex Holdings and trying to figure out how to survive the next 4 days. The industrial lemon cleaner didn't smell anything like lemons. It smelled like chemicals, cheap plastic, and the kind of desperation that settles into your bones after years of living paycheck to paycheck. The wet mop slapped against the marble floor in a slow rhythm, while fluorescent lights hummed overhead with the soothing charm of a migraine. My lower back ached. My bad knee throbbed. At 34 years old, I felt twice that age. Most people thought working inside a billion-dollar corporation would make you feel important. It doesn't. Not when you're the guy emptying trash cans after everyone else goes home. I wasn't thinking about stock prices or acquisitions or whatever rich people spent their time worrying about. I was doing math. Rent was due in 4 days. I was $80 short. Tonight's overtime would cover $40. A weekend shift at the diner might cover another $50. That left enough money for bread, milk, and maybe, if nothing else went wrong, Sarah's inhaler refill. My daughter was 7 years old and had asthma bad enough to make every cough sound like a threat. Right now she was asleep 2 floors below our apartment in Mrs. Gable's living room because I couldn't afford childcare and night shifts at the same time. The thought of her always tightened something inside my chest. Everything I did came back to that little girl. Every aching muscle, every double shift, every swallowed ounce of pride. Around 11:30, I was finishing my route when Greg, the night supervisor, cornered me near the locker room. Greg always looked like he had recently lost a fight with a clipboard. "One more stop, Tommy," he said. "Top floor. Boardroom's a mess." I groaned. "I'm already done." "Not anymore." He shoved a route sheet into my hand. "Empty the bins and get out. Don't touch anything." I looked at the assignment and immediately wished I hadn't. Floor 50, the executive penthouse level. Evelyn Croft's floor. Even janitors knew that name. CEO of Apex Holdings. Billionaire. Corporate shark. The kind of woman who bought companies the way normal people bought coffee. I had seen her once in the lobby months ago. She'd walked through a crowd of executives without looking at anyone. Expensive perfume. Expensive suit. Expensive confidence. She never noticed people like me. That was fine. I preferred being invisible. Invisible people kept their jobs. 20 minutes later, the service elevator opened onto the 50th floor. Everything up there felt different. Down below, the building was practical. Up here, it was luxury wrapped in silence. Thick charcoal carpet swallowed every footstep. Mahogany panels lined the walls. The air smelled like cedar, leather, and money. I hated it immediately. Places like this reminded you exactly where you stood in the food chain. The boardroom took 5 minutes. A few coffee cups, some shredded documents, nothing special. I checked my watch. If I hurried, I could still catch the last bus and save myself a freezing walk home. Then I saw the final item on the route sheet. CEO office. My stomach tightened. The massive mahogany door sat at the end of the hallway beneath a polished brass nameplate. Evelyn Croft. CEO. The office should have been empty. Every executive had left hours ago, yet a thin strip of warm yellow light leaked through the crack beneath the door. I stopped. Maybe someone forgot to turn off a lamp. Maybe an assistant was still working. Maybe I should just leave. Then I remembered Greg docking people's hours over smaller mistakes. I needed this job. $80 short was still $80 short. I walked forward and wrapped my fingers around the brass handle. The metal felt cold. I pushed the door open. At first, I didn't look up. I saw a pair of black stilettos on an expensive Persian rug. A suit jacket draped over a leather chair. Then a woman's irritated voice cut through the room. "I told you to leave it on the desk, Marcus." I froze. Every muscle locked. My heart slammed against my ribs. Slowly, I lifted my eyes, and the world stopped. Evelyn Croft stood 10 feet away beneath the glow of a brass desk lamp. She wasn't sitting behind her desk. She wasn't wearing the armor I'd seen in the lobby. Her blouse hung loose from one shoulder. Her hands strained behind her back, trying to undo something wrapped tightly around her torso. A heavy black medical brace, thick straps, metal supports, industrial grade. The kind of thing you only wore when something inside your body was badly broken. Beneath it, ugly bruises spread across her ribs in shades of purple and yellow. She looked exhausted, vulnerable, human. For 3 endless seconds neither of us moved, neither of us spoke. I knew instantly I had made the biggest mistake of my life. For 3 endless seconds, neither of us moved, neither of us spoke. The city lights beyond the massive windows seemed to disappear. The hum of the building faded. Even my own breathing felt distant. Evelyn Croft stared directly at me. Not shocked, not embarrassed, calculating. The kind of look predators give when they suddenly discover something unexpected inside their territory. Her hands slowly fell away from the metal clasps behind her back. The heavy brace remained locked around her ribs and spine. I could see the strain in her posture now, the way she stood unnaturally straight, the way one shoulder sat slightly higher than the other, the way pain seemed woven into every movement. "You aren't Marcus," she finally said. Her voice was low and terrifyingly calm. My throat went dry. I'm sorry." The words came out cracked and useless. "The manager sent me. I thought the office was empty." Her eyes flicked to the trash bag hanging from my hand, then to my uniform, then back to my face. She wasn't looking at me like a janitor. She was looking at me like a threat, not because I could hurt her, because I had seen something I wasn't supposed to see. "Get out." The words landed like a hammer. "Ma'am, I swear, I wasn't trying. Get out." My pulse exploded. Rent, Sarah, the inhaler, the bus fare. Every worry I carried suddenly condensed into one horrifying certainty. I was about to lose my job. I backed toward the door so fast I nearly tripped over the edge of the rug. "I didn't see anything," I said desperately. "I'm just here for the trash bins, that's all." Evelyn didn't answer. She simply watched me. Her expression never changed. That somehow made it worse. I yanked the door open and stumbled into the hallway. A second later it slammed shut behind me. The sound echoed through the empty executive floor like a gunshot. I stood there breathing hard, one hand pressed against the mahogany wall. Sweat rolled down my neck despite the cold air. "Stupid," I muttered. "Stupid, stupid, stupid." My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I had just walked in on one of the most powerful women in the country during what was clearly the worst moment of her day. Maybe her life. And rich people didn't stay rich by letting inconvenient witnesses wander around freely. I waited. 1 minute? 2 minutes. I expected security guards. An angry phone call. Something. Nothing happened. The hallway remained silent. Eventually I grabbed my mop bucket and practically ran to the service elevator. By midnight I was outside in freezing rain. The sleet hit my face like tiny needles while I hurried toward the bus stop. My knee hurt. My back hurt. My future felt like it was collapsing one painful inch at a time. On the bus ride home, I replayed the image over and over. The bruises, the brace, the exhaustion in her eyes. Evelyn Croft wasn't supposed to look human. She was supposed to look invincible. That's what billionaires did. They built walls so everyone else could believe they were untouchable. But for a few seconds inside that office, the walls had cracked, and I had seen what was underneath. I hated that I couldn't stop thinking about it. The next morning, or technically afternoon, since night shifts made time meaningless, I woke up to the sound of Sarah coloring in the living room. The small apartment smelled faintly of radiator heat and cheap coffee. I stared at the water stain on the ceiling above my bed and tried to convince myself everything would be fine. It wasn't convincing. "Daddy?" Sarah appeared in the doorway wearing dinosaur pajamas. "You look sick." "Thanks." She smiled. "You're welcome." Kids had a gift for honesty. I forced myself out of bed and made breakfast. Sarah talked about school while I nodded along and pretended I wasn't waiting for disaster. Every minute felt borrowed. Every second felt like a countdown. By 9:30 that night I was standing outside Apex Holdings again. Rain streaked down the glass facade. The building looked less like an office tower and more like a monument dedicated to making ordinary people feel small. I stepped into the lobby and headed straight for the employee entrance. My badge felt heavy in my hand. This was it. The moment. I pressed it against the scanner. Beep. Green light. The turnstile unlocked. I blinked. Then blinked again. Still green. Not fired. Yet. I made it downstairs to the locker room. Greg stood beside the punch clock chewing on a thumbnail. He looked up as I entered. "Leave the cart." My stomach dropped. "Here it comes." "Greg, about last night." "Don't care." He waved me off. "You're wanted upstairs." I froze. "Upstairs?" 50th floor. My blood turned to ice. "Who wants me?" Greg looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Hayes." That was worse. Much worse. Hayes wasn't security. Hayes was Evelyn Croft's personal assistant. If the assistant wanted me, it meant the CEO wanted me. I swallowed hard. "Am I fired?" Greg actually laughed. "If you were fired, they wouldn't send the CEO's assistant." Somehow that wasn't comforting. 42 seconds later, I was riding the service elevator back to the 50th floor. I counted every second. The doors opened. The expensive carpet swallowed my footsteps again. The air smelled like cedar and bergamot. Waiting near the entrance stood a tall man in a razor-sharp gray suit. Hayes. He looked like someone who ironed his socks. "Thomas Miller?" he asked. "Yes. Follow me." No explanation, no reassurance, just 2 words. He led me straight down the hallway toward the office, the same door, the same place where my life had almost imploded 24 hours earlier. Hayes opened it. "Go in," then he shut the door behind me. I stood frozen on the Persian rug. Across the room, Evelyn Croft sat behind a massive glass desk. Perfect suit, perfect posture, perfect control. The woman from last night had vanished, or at least she wanted me to believe she had. She didn't look up immediately. She continued reading something on a tablet. The silence stretched so long my pulse started pounding in my ears. Finally I cracked. "I'm sorry." The words burst out before I could stop them. Evelyn slowly lowered the tablet. Her eyes met mine. Sharp, cold, intelligent. "Sit down, Mr. Miller." The way she said my name made it clear this wasn't a request. I sat. And for the first time in my life, I found myself alone in a room with a billionaire who knew exactly how desperate I was. I had spent years dealing with uncomfortable situations. Military deployments. Emergency rooms with a wheezing 7-year-old. Landlords demanding rent I didn't have. None of them prepared me for sitting across from Evelyn Croft while she studied me in complete silence. The office felt even larger in daylight. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. Original artwork hung on the walls. The desk alone probably cost more than my car. If I combined every dollar I'd earned in the last 5 years, I still might not afford the rug beneath my shoes. Evelyn rested her tablet on the desk and folded her hands. "How long have you worked for Apex?" The question caught me off guard. "Almost 3 years. Military before that?" My stomach tightened. "Yes." She nodded once. "Army." It wasn't a question. "How do you know that?" "I know a great deal about everyone who enters my executive floor." That wasn't reassuring. At all. She glanced down at a file resting beside her tablet. My file. I recognized the employee photograph immediately. Suddenly the room felt much smaller. Thomas Miller, 34, former Army logistics specialist, honorably discharged after a training injury. Her eyes lifted. "Single father." I stared at her. "You look me up." "I look up everyone." "Fair enough." Terrifying, but fair enough. Another silence settled between us. I waited for the termination notice, the security escort, the paperwork. Instead, Evelyn asked something completely unexpected. "What exactly did you see?" My pulse jumped. Here it was, the real reason I was here. I considered lying, then remembered who I was sitting across from. People like Evelyn Croft could smell lies the way sharks smelled blood. Not much. Her expression remained unchanged. I sighed. "A medical brace." Silence. "Anything else?" I hesitated. "You looked like you were in pain." For the first time, something flickered across her face. Not anger, not embarrassment. Something closer to irritation. The kind people felt when someone accidentally noticed something they worked very hard to hide. Evelyn stood and walked toward the windows. The movement was graceful, controlled, but now that I knew what to look for, I could see it. The stiffness, the careful weight distribution, the tiny adjustments that kept discomfort from becoming visible. She stopped with her back to me. Do you know what happens when investors think a CEO is weak? I didn't answer, mostly because I had no idea. They panic. Her reflection stared back from the glass. Do you know what happens when board members think a CEO is vulnerable? Still no answer. They circle. The city stretched behind her, steel and glass beneath a gray winter sky. For a moment she looked less like a billionaire and more like someone carrying a burden she couldn't set down. Then the moment vanished. Evelyn turned around. The mask returned instantly. You are not going to discuss what you saw. I wasn't planning to. Good. Another pause. Then she added, because no one would believe you anyway. That stung more than it should have, not because she was wrong, because she was probably right. Who would believe a janitor over Evelyn Croft? Nobody. She returned to her chair and opened another folder. There's another issue, I frowned. Another issue? Yes. She slid a document across the desk. I picked it up. My eyes widened. It was my payroll record. Overtime requests, attendance logs, sick leave forms, everything. Why are you showing me this? Evelyn leaned back slightly. Because you've missed 6 shifts in 7 months. I felt my face heat up. My daughter was sick. I know. Silence. 3 asthma-related emergency visits. My throat tightened. How do you know that? Your health insurance claims. Of course she knew. She probably knew what brand of cereal I bought. The realization was unsettling. Evelyn studied me for several moments. Then she asked quietly, how is she? The question hit me harder than it should have. Maybe because it sounded genuine. Maybe because nobody in this building had ever asked before. Better. I cleared my throat. Most days. She nodded slowly. Good. The room became silent again. Then something strange happened. Evelyn closed the file. Completely. She looked directly at me. Not through me. Not around me. At me. Mr. Miller. Yes? I have a proposition. Every survival instinct I possessed immediately activated. Rich people never said proposition unless trouble was involved. What kind of proposition? A faint smile appeared. Not warm, not friendly. More like someone watching a chessboard. One that will significantly increase your income. I stared at her. What? She reached for another folder and slid it across the desk. I opened it. My eyes immediately locked onto a number near the bottom. Then I read it again. Then a third time. Surely I was misunderstanding something. $3,000 per week? My voice cracked. Evelyn nodded. I looked up. This has to be a mistake. It isn't. My entire yearly budget began recalculating itself against my will. Rent, utilities, Sarah's inhalers, medical bills, groceries. Every problem I'd spent years fighting suddenly looked different. Why? The word escaped before I could stop it. Evelyn's expression became unreadable. Because I need someone. Silence. Someone for what? She folded her hands again, the same way she had at the beginning of the meeting. Deliberate, controlled, calculated. I need someone who has already seen the truth. My pulse slowed, then accelerated, then slowed again, because suddenly I understood. This wasn't about janitorial work anymore. This was about what I'd seen inside this office. And somehow, for reasons I couldn't yet understand, Evelyn Croft had decided not to fire me. She had decided to hire me instead. For several seconds, I simply stared at the number on the page. $3,000 a week. Not a month. A week. My brain refused to process it. I did the math anyway. 15 years of financial anxiety had trained me to calculate numbers automatically. Rent paid. Utilities paid. Sarah's medication covered. Savings. Actual savings. The concept felt almost fictional. This isn't real, I said. Evelyn Croft didn't blink. It is. I looked down at the document again, then back up at her. You want to pay a janitor $3,000 a week? Former janitor. That wasn't better. Somehow it was worse. For what exactly? Evelyn rose from her chair and walked toward the windows again. Outside, the city stretched beneath a blanket of gray clouds. Traffic crawled through downtown streets. People hurried along sidewalks. Thousands of lives moving in different directions. 3 years ago, she said quietly, I was in a helicopter crash. The room went silent. I hadn't expected that answer. Not even close. She kept her eyes on the skyline. The official statement said minor injuries. A faint smile crossed her face. Public relations departments are remarkably creative. My attention shifted instinctively toward her posture, the stiffness, the careful movements. Suddenly, all of it made sense. It wasn't minor. Evelyn laughed softly, a humorless sound. No, she reached up and rested a hand against her side. 3 fractured vertebrae, multiple broken ribs, nerve damage. I swallowed hard. Jesus, that was roughly my reaction. The joke landed because of how calmly she delivered it, like someone discussing weather instead of trauma. She turned toward me. 6 surgeries. Silence. 2 years of rehabilitation. Another silence. And every doctor I've hired has informed me that stress makes everything worse. I nodded slowly. You seem stressed. For the first time, an actual smile appeared. Tiny. Brief. Gone almost instantly. You're observant. I wasn't sure that was a compliment. Evelyn returned to her desk and sat down carefully. Now that I knew, every movement revealed effort, hidden effort. The kind people work desperately to conceal. The board doesn't know the full extent of my condition. Why not? She looked at me as though I'd asked why people breathed air. Because if they think I can't lead this company, they'll replace me. The answer arrived without emotion, pure fact. I understood that tone. Soldiers used it sometimes when discussing unpleasant realities. Things didn't have to be fair to be true. And this has something to do with me? I asked. Yes. Evelyn opened another file. Over the last 18 months, I've gone through 7 executive aides. I frowned. 7? 3 quit. She flipped a page. 2 violated confidentiality agreements. Another page. 1 attempted to sell information. I raised an eyebrow. What happened to that one? Lawyers. Fair enough. She closed the file. The point is, I need someone reliable. I almost laughed. I'm a janitor. You're a former logistics specialist. She didn't miss a beat. You maintained security clearances for 6 years. Another page. You've never had a disciplinary complaint. Another page. And despite seeing something that could potentially damage me professionally, you haven't told anyone. I hesitated. It's only been 24 hours. Most people would have called someone within 24 minutes. That was probably true. The room fell quiet again. Then Evelyn delivered the sentence that changed everything. I want you to become my shadow. I blinked. Your what? My shadow. She folded her hands. You accompany me. You manage practical logistics. You assist when my condition becomes problematic. I stared. You're serious. Completely. You want a night janitor following you around corporate events? I want someone I can trust. The answer came so quickly, it almost sounded rehearsed. That caught my attention. Trust wasn't a word people like Evelyn Croft used casually. It certainly wasn't a word billionaires used with janitors. I looked down at the contract again. $3,000 a week. Full medical benefits. Flexible hours. Transportation allowance. My eyes stopped at the insurance section, then widened. Executive-level family coverage. My pulse kicked hard against my ribs. This includes dependents? Evelyn followed my gaze. Yes. I swallowed. Including asthma treatment? She nodded once. Including asthma treatment. The room blurred for a second, not dramatically. Just enough. I thought about Sarah sitting in emergency rooms. I thought about inhalers we stretched longer than we should. I thought about nights listening for wheezing through the apartment walls because I was terrified of sleeping too deeply. Suddenly, the number on the page mattered less than the insurance section beneath it. Evelyn noticed. Of course she noticed. Your daughter comes first. My eyes lifted. What? Every decision you've made in the last 7 years has been about her. She said it calmly. I reviewed your file. Silence settled between us. Then she added, That's one of the reasons you're sitting here. I wasn't prepared for that. Not emotionally, not practically, not at all. For several moments, I simply stared at the contract. Finally, I looked up. Why me? Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She studied me. Really studied me. Then she glanced briefly toward the office door, toward the place where I'd accidentally walked in the night before, because when you saw me at my weakest. Her voice softened slightly. You looked concerned. The words hit harder than they should have. Most people would have seen opportunity. The city stretched behind her. Glass towers, power, wealth, everything she'd spent her life building. Yet sitting across from me, she looked unexpectedly tired. Not physically, emotionally, like someone exhausted from carrying a secret alone. "And that matters?" I asked quietly. Evelyn held my gaze. For the first time since entering the office, there was no CEO in her eyes. No billionaire. No corporate predator. Just a woman who hurt every day and trusted almost nobody. "More than you realize." Silence followed. Long, heavy, important. Then I looked down at the contract one final time. Somewhere across town, Sarah was sitting in school learning multiplication tables, completely unaware that her life might be about to change. I picked up the pen, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine a future that didn't begin with fear. My first week working for Evelyn Croft felt like being dropped onto another planet. On Monday morning, I traded a janitor's uniform for tailored suits that cost more than my monthly rent. By Tuesday, I had ridden in 3 private elevators, attended 2 executive briefings, and learned that billionaires somehow managed to schedule meetings about meetings. By Wednesday, I was fairly certain rich people existed in a completely separate dimension from the rest of humanity. The strangest part wasn't the money. It was the silence. The people surrounding Evelyn moved differently. They spoke carefully, laughed carefully, disagreed carefully. Every conversation felt like a chess match disguised as small talk. Nobody said exactly what they meant. Nobody seemed relaxed, except Hayes. Even then, only occasionally. "You're staring again," Hayes said Thursday morning as we crossed the executive lobby. "Sorry, don't apologize." He adjusted his tie. "Just stop looking surprised every time someone spends $1,200 on lunch. $1,200 is a used car." Hayes sighed. "This is going to be a long partnership." He wasn't wrong. My official title was Executive Operations Associate, a meaningless corporate phrase invented specifically to avoid explaining what I actually did. In reality, I followed Evelyn almost everywhere. Meetings, events, flights, site visits. My job was simple: keep schedules moving, handle practical problems. Most importantly, recognize when her condition was becoming difficult before anyone else noticed. The last part required learning quickly. Evelyn hid pain better than anyone I'd ever met. Years of military service had taught me how people concealed injuries. Evelyn had turned it into an art form. She never complained, never asked for sympathy, never admitted weakness. She simply endured. Unfortunately, endurance had limits. I noticed the signs by the 3rd day: the slight tightening around her eyes, the way her left hand occasionally pressed against her ribs when she thought nobody was looking, the subtle shift in posture that meant standing had become painful. Small things, easy to miss, unless you were specifically watching for them. Thursday afternoon, I was standing outside a conference room while Evelyn negotiated a merger worth more money than I could comprehend. Through the glass walls, I watched executives argue over percentages and projections. Inside, everyone focused on numbers. I focused on Evelyn. 47 minutes into the meeting, she adjusted her position for the 6th time. Not good. 53 minutes in, her jaw tightened briefly. Worse. At 61 minutes, she reached for a glass of water and her hand trembled almost imperceptibly. Problem: when the meeting finally ended, she exited the room surrounded by lawyers and advisors. Nobody noticed anything unusual. I did. The moment we reached a private hallway, I stepped closer. "You need 10 minutes. Evelyn looked at me. "Excuse me?" 10 minutes. Her eyes narrowed. "Why?" "Because you're hurting." Silence. Hayes stopped walking. Apparently he wanted to see how this played out. Evelyn studied me for several seconds, then shook her head. "I have another meeting. You also have nerve damage." More silence. The hallway became very quiet. Finally Hayes cleared his throat. "The next meeting can wait 10 minutes." Evelyn turned toward him. Betrayal flashed across her face. "Whose side are you on?" Hayes smiled. "The side where you remain functional." She looked irritated, which, based on what I'd observed, was the closest thing Evelyn Croft came to admitting someone else was right. 10 minutes later, she sat alone in a private office overlooking the city while I stood near the door pretending not to notice how exhausted she looked. Eventually she broke the silence. "You're annoyingly observant. I've heard that before. Frequently. Mostly from my daughter. That changed something. Not much. Just enough." Evelyn looked away from the window. "Sarah." I blinked. "What?" "Your daughter." She folded her arms carefully. "How is she?" The question caught me off guard. Again. "Good." I smiled despite myself. "Actually, really good." And it was true. The executive health plan had already changed everything. New specialists, better medication, faster appointments. For the first time in years, Sarah's asthma wasn't controlling our lives. Evelyn nodded slowly. Good. There was that word again. Good. Simple. Genuine. Human. The conversation ended there. Yet somehow the silence felt different afterward. That evening, I arrived home to find Sarah sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by crayons. She immediately held up a drawing. "Look." I did. The picture showed 3 stick figures. One was obviously me, one was Sarah. The third stood beside an enormous building that stretched halfway off the page. "Who's that?" I asked. Sarah looked horrified. "That's your boss." Of course it was. "Why is the building bigger than everyone?" "Because she's rich." Fair reasoning. I examined the drawing more closely. The stick figure version of Evelyn wore a tiny crown. "What's this?" Sarah shrugged. "Boss energy." I laughed so hard I nearly fell out of my chair. The drawing ended up folded inside my jacket pocket the next morning. I forgot it was there, which wouldn't have mattered. Except life had developed a habit of turning small mistakes into important moments. And 3 days later, inside the penthouse office of one of the most powerful women in America, that crayon drawing was about to fall into exactly the wrong hands. By the second month, I had learned 2 important things about Evelyn Croft. First, she could dismantle a hostile acquisition faster than most people could order lunch. Second, she was absolutely terrible at taking care of herself. The first skill made her a billionaire. The second was probably going to kill her. It was a rainy Wednesday evening when both facts collided. We had just finished 12 straight hours of meetings. Investors, attorneys, analysts, more investors. Somewhere around hour 9, I stopped pretending the schedule was reasonable. Around hour 12, I started wondering whether Evelyn secretly ran on batteries. We finally returned to the executive penthouse shortly after 8. The city glowed beneath sheets of rain beyond the massive windows. Hayes had gone home. The cleaning staff hadn't arrived yet. For once, the entire floor felt quiet. Evelyn crossed the office toward her private workspace without removing her coat. Not a good sign. "You should go home," she said. I looked up from my tablet. "You first." Her expression suggested she'd rather negotiate with a shark. "Mr. Miller." "Evelyn." Silence. That got her attention. Nobody called her Evelyn. Not in the office. Not in boardrooms. Not in public. For a second, I wondered if I'd just committed career suicide. Then she sighed. "You're becoming difficult. Occupational hazard." She shook her head and disappeared into the private penthouse suite attached to the office. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Something felt wrong. My military instincts had survived long after my enlistment ended. Sometimes they whispered. Sometimes they shouted. Right now they were shouting. I set down the tablet and walked toward the private suite. "Evelyn?" No answer. I knocked once. Nothing. Twice. Still nothing. My stomach tightened. I opened the door. The suite looked more like a luxury apartment than an office extension. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Modern furniture. Soft lighting. Everything immaculate. Except Evelyn. She sat on the floor beside a leather sofa, one hand pressed against her ribs, the other gripping a half-removed medical brace. Her face had gone pale. Sweat glistened along her forehead. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she closed her eyes. "This is embarrassing." Relief hit me so hard I almost laughed. "You scared the hell out of me. Sorry." The apology sounded genuine, which somehow made the situation more alarming. I crouched beside her. "What happened?" Brace locked. She exhaled slowly. Again, I looked down. The heavy support device sat twisted awkwardly around her torso. One of the metal clasps appeared jammed. "Can you stand?" Eventually. Not encouraging. I carefully examined the mechanism. "I think the release pin is stuck." Evelyn laughed weakly. "Fantastic." For several seconds, I worked the latch without success. The brace refused to move. The tension in her shoulders increased visibly. Pain radiated through every line of her body. Finally, I looked up. "This is going to hurt. I'm aware." "You sure?" Evelyn opened one eye. "Thomas." The use of my first name caught me off guard. "Yeah? Just do it." So I did. The clasp released with a sharp metallic snap. Evelyn sucked in a breath immediately. Every muscle in her body tightened. Then, slowly, the brace loosened. For several moments, she remained completely still, breathing carefully, recovering. Finally, the tension began leaving her shoulders. The difference was astonishing, like watching someone surface after being trapped underwater. I sat back. "Better?" She nodded once. "Much." Silence settled across the room. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The city lights shimmered below. For the first time since I'd met her, Evelyn looked exhausted enough to stop pretending otherwise. Then something slipped from my jacket pocket. A folded piece of paper drifted onto the floor between us. I froze immediately. "Oh no," Evelyn frowned. "What's that?" I moved too slowly. She picked it up first, unfolded it, and stared. My soul attempted to leave my body. Sarah's drawing. The one with the giant building, the tiny crown. Boss energy. Evelyn studied it for several seconds, then looked up. "Is that supposed to be me?" I considered several possible responses. None seemed likely to improve the situation. Maybe. Another silence. Then, unexpectedly, Evelyn laughed. Not the polite executive laugh she used around investors. A real laugh. Warm, surprised, human. I had never heard it before. "Why am I wearing a crown?" she asked. I buried my face in my hands. "Because you're rich." That made her laugh harder, which somehow made everything worse. Or better. I wasn't sure. When the laughter finally faded, Evelyn looked back at the drawing. Her expression softened slightly. "She's talented." The words were quiet, genuine. I smiled despite myself. "She'd be thrilled you said that." Evelyn carefully folded the drawing and handed it back. "Frame it." "Frame it?" "Obviously." She nodded toward the giant building dominating half the page. "The architectural proportions are exceptional." I laughed. She smiled, and for one brief moment, sitting on the floor of a penthouse while rain fell across the city, neither of us felt like a billionaire or an employee. Just two exhausted adults trying to survive difficult lives the best way we knew how. Unfortunately, moments like that never lasted, because somewhere inside Apex Holdings, people were beginning to notice how often Thomas Miller appeared beside Evelyn Croft. And not everyone was happy about it. The rumors started on a Monday. By Wednesday, they had reached every executive floor in Apex Holdings. By Friday, people had stopped pretending they weren't talking. I wasn't surprised. Corporations were basically high schools with better suits and larger budgets. The difference was that the gossip involved stock prices instead of prom dates. I noticed the shift immediately. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Assistants exchanged looks. Senior executives suddenly became very interested in who I was and why I was standing beside Evelyn Croft at nearly every meeting. Most of them were too professional to ask directly. "Most. You're famous now," Hayes informed me one morning while we waited outside a board review session. "That's unfortunate. Depends who you ask." I glanced down the hallway. "And who exactly is asking?" Hayes smiled without humor. "Everyone." "Great. Exactly what I wanted. Visibility. My favorite thing." Across the hallway, a group of executives entered the conference room. One of them paused briefly while passing us. Richard Caldwell, board member, investor, professional predator. If Evelyn Croft was a shark, Richard Caldwell was the kind of shark other sharks avoided. Tall, expensive suit, permanent expression of polite disappointment. He looked at me, then at Hayes, then toward Evelyn's office. "Interesting hire." Hayes didn't respond, neither did I. Caldwell smiled faintly. "Very interesting." Then he walked away. "Something about the exchange bothered me," Hayes noticed. Of course he did. Ignore him. Who is he? Hayes adjusted his tie. A man who wants Evelyn's job. That explained a lot. Friday evening arrived with freezing rain and another 14-hour workday. By 6:30, most of the building had emptied. By 7, the executive floor felt almost deserted. Evelyn was still working. Naturally. She sat behind her desk reviewing acquisition reports while I organized schedules for the following week. The silence stretched comfortably between us. Not awkward anymore. Familiar, which was strange considering we'd only known each other a few months. Finally, Evelyn looked up from her paperwork. Sarah's appointment go well? I blinked. You remembered? She stared at me. Thomas. Fair point. She remembered everything. Yeah, I smiled despite myself. Doctor says the new treatment is helping. Something softened in her expression. Just slightly. Good. There was that word again. Good. Simple. Genuine. It appeared more often lately. Before I could respond, a sharp knock interrupted us. Neither of us expected visitors. Especially not at 7 o'clock on a Friday night. Hayes appeared in the doorway looking annoyed. Problem. Evelyn immediately set down the report. What kind? Hayes stepped inside. Caldwell. Of course. Evelyn Sahil. What now? Hayes handed her a folder. He's requesting an emergency governance review. The room became quiet. I didn't know enough about corporate politics to understand the details, but I knew enough to recognize trouble when I saw it. Evelyn opened the folder. Read the first page, then the second. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Not good. He's challenging operational authority. Hayes nodded, and questioning recent staffing decisions. Silence. Then realization hit me. Staffing decisions. Me. Evelyn closed the folder carefully. Too carefully. He's fishing. Hayes agreed. Yes. I looked between them. Want to explain in English? Neither laughed. That definitely wasn't a good sign. Evelyn folded her hands. Richard Caldwell has spent 3 years waiting for evidence that I'm no longer capable of leading Apex. My stomach tightened. Because of the accident. Because of power. Her voice remained calm. The accident simply makes me vulnerable. Suddenly the rumors felt a lot less harmless. This wasn't office gossip anymore. This was strategy, pressure, politics. Caldwell wasn't curious about me. He was looking for weakness, looking for leverage, looking for anything that might expose Evelyn's condition. Hayes left shortly afterward. The rain intensified outside. Wind rattled softly against the glass. By 8:30, Evelyn finally stood from her desk. The movement looked normal at first, then it didn't. Her hand immediately found the edge of the desk. Her shoulders stiffened. The color drained slightly from her face. Evelyn? She waved me off. I'm fine. She wasn't. 2 steps later, her knee buckled. Not completely. Just enough. I was already moving before she lost balance. My hand caught her elbow. The other steadied her shoulder. For one brief second, her full weight leaned against me. The contact startled both of us. Evelyn immediately straightened. Or tried to. Pain flashed across her face before she buried it. Damn it. The words escaped under her breath. I looked at her carefully. How long? What? How long have you been pushing through this today? Silence, which answered the question. Evelyn. She looked away. Toward the city. Toward anything except me. Finally she exhaled. Since lunch. I closed my eyes briefly. That's 7 hours. I had meetings. You had pain. Another silence. Longer this time. Then something unexpected happened. Evelyn laughed. Softly. Tiredly. You sound exactly like my physical therapist. Smart person. Insufferable person. Also possible. To my surprise, she smiled. Then the smile faded. The city lights reflected across the windows behind her. For the first time all evening, she looked genuinely exhausted. Not CEO exhausted. Human exhausted. Thomas? I looked up. Her voice had changed. Quieter now. More vulnerable than usual. Yeah? She hesitated. Just briefly. Thank you. The words caught me completely off guard. Because gratitude wasn't something Evelyn Croft offered often. Not because she was unkind. Because she wasn't accustomed to needing help. I nodded slowly. You're welcome. Outside, rain streaked down the glass. Somewhere in another part of the city, Sarah was probably finishing homework and arguing with cartoons. Inside Apex Holdings, the most powerful woman in the building stood beside the least important employee she'd ever hired. And neither of us noticed that Richard Caldwell's investigation had already begun, because while we were learning to trust each other, someone else was busy trying to destroy that trust. Richard Caldwell made his move on a Tuesday morning, not publicly, not dramatically. People like Richard rarely attacked directly. They preferred paperwork, committees, internal reviews, death by documentation. By noon, 3 separate governance inquiries had landed on Evelyn's desk. By 2 o'clock, several board members were quietly asking questions. By 4, rumors were spreading through the executive floors faster than quarterly earnings reports. The official concern involved operational transparency. The real concern was simpler. Richard Caldwell wanted proof that Evelyn Croft was vulnerable, and he was running out of patience. I learned all of this while sitting outside a board strategy session pretending to understand a 70-page report about market expansion. Hayes dropped into the chair beside me, carrying enough frustration to power a small city. He's escalating. I looked up. Caldwell? Who else? Hayes loosened his tie. 3 requests for executive health disclosures in 48 hours. My stomach tightened. Can he do that? Hayes laughed humorlessly. He can ask. And Evelyn can refuse. That sounded reassuring until I noticed the look on his face. What's the problem? Hayes stared down the hallway. The problem is that every time she refuses, people start wondering why. Across the building, Evelyn sat through another marathon meeting while pretending nothing was wrong. Unfortunately, I knew her too well now. By 6 o'clock, she had adjusted her posture 11 times. By 7, she'd stopped hiding the fact that every movement hurt. By 8, I was considering physically dragging her out of the conference room. She exited the meeting surrounded by executives discussing projections and acquisitions. Nobody noticed her exhaustion. Nobody except me. The moment the hallway cleared, I stepped beside her. You need to go home. Evelyn didn't break stride. I have 2 more calls. No. She stopped walking, slowly turned toward me. No, no. The word echoed through the empty corridor. Silence followed. Then something remarkable happened. She actually considered it. 1 call. Home. 30 minutes. Home. She narrowed her eyes. You are becoming alarmingly comfortable telling me what to do. Occupational hazard. For a second I thought she might argue. Instead, she sighed. Fine. Victory. Small victory. But still. 45 minutes later, we arrived at her penthouse overlooking the river. The apartment occupied the top 2 floors of a building worth more than every home I'd ever lived in combined. Yet despite the luxury, the place always felt strangely empty, beautiful, impressive, lonely. Evelyn disappeared into the bedroom suite while I organized the next day's schedule from the dining table. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Something felt wrong. Again. I hated when my instincts were right. Evelyn? No answer. I stood immediately, crossed the penthouse, knocked once. Nothing. Twice. Still nothing. My pulse quickened. I opened the bedroom door. Evelyn sat on the floor beside the bed. The medical brace rested nearby. Her breathing came in short, uneven bursts. For one horrifying second, I thought she'd collapsed. Then I realized what had happened. She wasn't injured. She was trapped. One of the support straps had twisted while she was removing the brace. The entire mechanism had locked against itself. Pain radiated across her face. You've got to be kidding me. She looked up. I was trying to avoid another embarrassing rescue. I crouched beside her immediately. How long? 10 minutes. Why didn't you call? Evelyn stared at me. Because I'm a billionaire. I blinked. That's your reason? It sounded better in my head. Despite the situation, I laughed. She did too. Briefly. Then winced. Carefully, I worked the twisted straps loose. The process took several minutes. During that time, neither of us spoke much. The room remained quiet, except for the distant hum of city traffic below. Eventually, the final clasp released. The tension left her shoulders almost instantly. Evelyn closed her eyes. Thank God. I sat back against the bed frame. You know, most people would have hired a nurse. Most people aren't me. Fair point. For several moments, we simply sat there. Exhausted, quiet, human. Then Evelyn glanced toward a framed picture sitting on the nightstand. I recognized it immediately. Sarah. The drawing from months earlier. The one with the giant building and the ridiculous crown. My eyes widened. You kept that? Evelyn looked almost defensive. It's framed. You framed it. You told me to appreciate art. I absolutely did not. To my surprise, she laughed. A real laugh, the kind that transformed her entire face. Then the laughter faded and something softer appeared instead. Sarah's treatment is working. The statement caught me off guard. Yeah. My voice lowered. It is. For a moment I thought about all the nights spent in emergency rooms. The fear, the helplessness, the exhaustion. Then I thought about the last 6 months. No midnight hospital visits, no panic, no desperate calculations about medical bills, just breathing, normal breathing. She ran a mile last week, I said quietly. Evelyn smiled. That's good. There was that word again. Good. The simplest word in the world. Somehow it always meant more when she said it. The next morning, Sarah attended her specialist appointment. The doctor reviewed the latest tests, smiled, then delivered words I'd been waiting years to hear. She's improving faster than expected. I sat there stunned. Sarah grinned like she'd won the lottery. Maybe she had. That evening, when I told Evelyn, she didn't say much, just nodded once, then looked out across the city lights. Good. But this time the word sounded different. Warmer. Personal. Like she was genuinely happy. Not because it affected the company, not because it affected her schedule, because it affected us. And somewhere deep down, I realized something that should have worried me. The line between employer and friend had started to disappear. Unfortunately, Richard Caldwell had noticed that too, and he was preparing to use it against us. The gala at the Camden Museum of Modern History was supposed to be simple. Wealthy donors, board members, politicians, a few speeches, a few $1 million pledged to cultural preservation, the kind of event where everyone wore black tie attire and pretended they enjoyed networking. Unfortunately, nothing involving Evelyn Croft remained simple for very long. By 6 o'clock, the museum glittered beneath crystal chandeliers and carefully positioned lighting. Guests moved through marble halls carrying champagne glasses worth more than my monthly grocery budget. Security teams stood discreetly near entrances. String quartets played somewhere in the distance. The entire evening felt like a different universe. I adjusted my tuxedo collar for the 10th time. I hate this thing. Hayes glanced over. You look fine. I feel like a waiter. You are standing beside a billionaire. Fair point. Across the grand staircase, Evelyn made her entrance. Conversations immediately softened. Heads turned. Donors straightened. Board members smiled too quickly. The effect was almost ridiculous. She wore a dark midnight blue gown that somehow made every other person in the room disappear. The medical brace remained hidden beneath tailored support garments designed by specialists who probably charged more than my first car. To everyone else, she looked flawless. I knew better. As she descended the staircase, I noticed the slight hesitation before each step, the careful balance, the hidden cost of every movement. She caught me watching. One eyebrow lifted. I looked away immediately. She smiled, tiny, amused. Then the smile vanished as Richard Caldwell approached. Of course he did. The man seemed to materialize whenever trouble was nearby. Evelyn. His voice carried all the warmth of a tax audit. Richard. Wonderful turnout. It is. Silence followed. The kind of silence where both people were smiling while imagining entirely different outcomes. Caldwell's eyes drifted toward me. And Thomas is here as well. There it was. The real reason for the conversation. Evelyn's posture hardened instantly. Yes. Caldwell nodded thoughtfully. Interesting arrangement. Not particularly. No? His smile widened slightly. People are curious. Evelyn's expression didn't change. People should find better hobbies. That ended the discussion, at least temporarily. 2 hours later, The gala was in full swing. Donations were announced. Speeches delivered. Photographs taken. I remained near the edges of the crowd while Evelyn moved between conversations like a general navigating a battlefield. Everything appeared normal. Then I noticed the signs. The same signs I'd spent months learning. A slight tightening around her eyes. A delayed reaction when someone touched her arm. A subtle shift in posture. Problem. I checked my watch. She'd been standing almost continuously for nearly 3 hours. Worse. Across the ballroom, Evelyn finished a conversation with museum trustees and started toward the private donor lounge. Halfway there, she slowed. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Enough for me. I moved immediately. Unfortunately, so did Caldwell. The board member intercepted her near the entrance. One moment. Evelyn stopped. Barely. Richard, the governance committee would like an answer. Not here. Not tonight. Not now. Even I knew that. Caldwell didn't care. Regarding executive disclosures, several nearby guests turned subtly toward the conversation. Evelyn's jaw tightened. This isn't the place. Actually, Caldwell replied softly, it's the perfect place. Anger flashed across my chest, not because of corporate politics, because I could see what nobody else could. Evelyn was struggling, the pain was getting worse, and Caldwell had chosen this exact moment to apply pressure. Then it happened. Tiny, almost invisible. Evelyn's hand trembled. Just once. Most people missed it. Caldwell didn't. His eyes sharpened instantly. There. Proof. The thing he'd been searching for. I started moving before I consciously decided to. Evelyn. Both turned toward me. I walked directly into the conversation. Not politely. Not carefully. Directly. Every survival instinct in my body screamed that interrupting 2 billionaires was a terrible idea. Too late. The museum director is looking for you. Complete lie. Evelyn stared at me. Caldwell stared at me. I kept going. Urgently. Another lie. The silence stretched. Then something remarkable happened. Evelyn understood. Immediately. Of course. She turned away from Caldwell without waiting for a response. Excuse me. For one brief second, Caldwell looked furious. Then the expression disappeared beneath a professional smile. But I saw it. More importantly, so did Evelyn. We reached the private donor lounge before she finally stopped walking. The room was empty, quiet, safe. The moment the door closed behind us, her composure cracked. Not dramatically, not publicly, just enough. One hand found the edge of a table. Her breathing became uneven. Damn it, I moved beside her. Sit down. No argument this time. That scared me more than anything else. Evelyn lowered herself into a chair. Every muscle looked exhausted. Every movement hurt. The hidden battle she'd been fighting all evening was finally winning. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she looked up. You lied. I did. Very convincingly. Thank you. To my surprise, she laughed. Then immediately regretted it. Ow. Maybe don't do that. Another laugh. Softer this time. The room fell quiet again. Outside, music drifted faintly through the walls. Applause erupted somewhere inside the gala. The world continued turning. Inside the donor lounge, the most powerful woman in the building sat with her eyes closed, exhausted from pretending to be invincible. Finally, she opened them. You saved me. The words landed heavily. I shook my head. I interrupted a conversation. Thomas. Her voice softened. You saved me. Neither of us spoke afterward, because sometimes the truth was too simple to argue with. Unfortunately, while the gala continued outside, Richard Caldwell was putting together pieces of a puzzle, and for the first time, he was getting dangerously close to the answer. The fallout from the museum gala arrived faster than anyone expected. By 8 o'clock the next morning, 3 members of the governance committee had requested emergency meetings. By 10, Richard Caldwell had circulated a memorandum questioning executive transparency. By noon, half the board was suddenly interested in Evelyn Croft's health. Funny how concern always appeared when power was involved. I was standing outside Evelyn's office reviewing schedules when Hayes emerged from a conference room carrying enough frustration to qualify as a natural disaster. How bad? I asked. Hayes stopped walking. Scale of 1 to 10? Sure. 22. Not encouraging. He handed me a tablet. Caldwell's memorandum filled the screen. Most of it was corporate language designed to sound responsible while accomplishing something entirely different: accountability, governance, fiduciary obligations. The usual vocabulary people used when they wanted someone removed without saying so directly. Halfway down the page, I found the real objective: executive capacity review. My stomach tightened. He's trying to force disclosure. Hayes nodded. Exactly. Can he? Hayes looked toward Evelyn's closed office door. That's what we're about to find out. Inside the office, Evelyn was preparing for battle. Not a public battle. Not yet. The kind fought through documents, legal arguments, and board votes. In some ways, those were the most dangerous ones. I entered carrying coffee and immediately knew she hadn't slept much. The signs were familiar now. Tension around the eyes, stiffness in her shoulders, a fatigue she worked hard to disguise. You should sit down, I said. Evelyn didn't even look up from the reports covering her desk. Good morning to you too. That's not a no. It's also not a yes. Progress. Sort of. I placed the coffee beside her. She reached for it automatically, then paused. Thank you. The words came easier now. Still rare, but easier. You're welcome. Silence settled briefly. Then Evelyn leaned back in her chair. Richard thinks he's close. Is he? She looked toward the city beyond the windows. For several seconds, she didn't answer. Finally she spoke. Closer than I'd like. That honesty surprised me. Months ago, Evelyn would have dismissed the concern entirely. Now she simply acknowledged it. Another sign things had changed. Around 3 o'clock that afternoon, the governance committee meeting began. Unlike the gala, there were no chandeliers, no donors, no speeches, just lawyers, board members, and enough tension to power the building. Hayes remained beside the wall. I sat near the back. Officially, I wasn't part of the discussion. Unofficially, everyone knew exactly why I was there. Richard Caldwell stood first. Naturally. He spoke for nearly 20 minutes. Responsibility, leadership, transparency, shareholder confidence. Every sentence carefully crafted. Every word aimed at a single target. Evelyn listened without interruption, without reaction, without giving him anything. Finally, Caldwell reached the end of his presentation. The board deserves certainty. Silence. Then he looked directly at Evelyn. Can you honestly state that your physical condition has no impact on your ability to lead Apex Holdings? The room became very still. This was it. The question, the trap. Every person present understood it. Evelyn folded her hands calmly. No. Several heads snapped upward. Caldwell's eyes widened slightly. He hadn't expected that answer. Neither had I. The room remained silent. Then Evelyn continued. My condition affects me every day. More silence. It affects how long I stand, how far I travel, how much pain I tolerate. She looked directly at the board. What it does not affect is my ability to run this company. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. For the first time all afternoon, Caldwell looked uncertain. Evelyn rose from her chair. Slowly. Carefully. Honestly. No pretending. No performance. For 3 years, I hid the severity of my injuries because I believed weakness would become a weapon. Her eyes shifted briefly toward Caldwell, then back to the board. I was right. The words landed hard. Several directors looked away. Others shifted uncomfortably, because everyone knew she wasn't wrong, but hiding the truth also gave people control over it. She paused. I'm finished doing that. The room remained silent. Then something unexpected happened. One of the oldest board members spoke. What are the company's performance numbers since your accident? The chief financial officer answered immediately. Revenue growth, expansion, record profits, strategic acquisitions, market leadership. The list continued for several minutes. By the end, the room felt different. Not because Evelyn had won an argument, because the facts had. Caldwell knew it too. I could see it in his face. The meeting ended 40 minutes later. No dramatic speeches, no public humiliation, no corporate fireworks. Just a simple vote rejecting the executive capacity review. 9 votes against, 2 in favor. Caldwell sat motionless. The outcome wasn't close. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked old, not defeated, just tired, like someone realizing a battle had ended before he was ready. Afterward, the building gradually emptied. Evening settled across the city. Employees went home. Lights switched off, floor by floor. Eventually, only a handful remained. I found Evelyn alone in the executive lounge overlooking the skyline. She stood near the windows watching sunset spill orange across the glass towers. "You won," she smiled faintly. "Did I?" "Pretty sure." Silence followed. Then she laughed softly. "Maybe." For several moments, neither of us spoke. The city glowed beneath us. Traffic lights flickered. Buildings shimmered. Somewhere far below, ordinary people were finishing ordinary days. Finally, Evelyn looked toward me. "You know what the worst part is?" "What?" She glanced down, then back up. "I'm tired." The admission sounded almost shocking, not because it was dramatic, because it was honest. I nodded slowly. "Then maybe it's time you stop carrying everything alone." The words escaped before I could stop them. Silence followed. Long silence. Dangerous silence. Then Evelyn looked away toward the skyline. A faint smile touched her lips. "Maybe." And for the first time since I opened the wrong office door months earlier, it felt like neither of us was fighting alone anymore. Recovery wasn't dramatic. That was the first thing I learned. Movies liked dramatic recoveries, inspirational music, miraculous breakthroughs, emotional speeches delivered at sunset. Real recovery looked more like physical therapy appointments, stubborn determination, and learning how to stop pretending everything was fine. 3 months after the board vote, Evelyn Croft finally took her first full weekend off in nearly 6 years. The financial press treated it like a national emergency. One business publication actually published an article titled, "Is Evelyn Croft Stepping Back?" Hayes framed it and hung it in his office. Evelyn was not amused. Everyone else was. "You know," I said one Monday morning, "normal people take weekends off all the time." Evelyn looked up from her tablet. "Normal people don't run multinational corporations. Normal people also sleep. Overrated. According to who? Me." Fair enough. Some battles remained unwinnable. Still, things were changing. Slowly, quietly, in ways that mattered. The governance committee had backed off after the vote. Richard Caldwell remained on the board, but the momentum he'd spent months building had vanished. Apex Holdings continued posting strong numbers. Investors stopped panicking. Headlines moved on to newer scandals. The corporate world had the attention span of a goldfish with internet access, which suited everyone perfectly. More importantly, Evelyn had finally started listening to her doctors. Not always, not enthusiastically, but enough. The difference showed. She looked healthier, less exhausted, less like someone carrying an invisible war inside her body every hour of the day. One Thursday afternoon, we finished a site visit in Boston and boarded the company jet for the flight home. The cabin remained quiet, except for the soft hum of the engines. Evelyn sat across from me reviewing reports while I sorted schedules. Halfway through the flight, she lowered the tablet. "How's Sarah?" The question no longer surprised me. "Good," I smiled. "Actually really good. Running?" I laughed. "Constantly." Evelyn nodded. "Good." There was that word again, the word that somehow meant more every time she said it. I reached into my briefcase and removed a photograph. Sarah at a school fun run, grinning like she'd just conquered the world. Evelyn accepted it carefully, studied it, smiled, a genuine smile. "She looks happy." The statement sounded simple, yet something about it landed differently. Maybe because she wasn't talking about the picture, maybe because she understood exactly how hard we'd fought to get there. "She is." Evelyn handed the photo back, then looked out the window toward the clouds. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, she asked quietly, "Do you ever think about how close you came to saying no?" I frowned. "To what?" She turned back toward me. "The job." Silence settled across the cabin. I'd never really considered it. Not seriously. Sometimes. Evelyn nodded slowly. "Me too." The honesty caught me off guard. Again, it happened less often now, but it still happened. Across town, Sarah was busy creating chaos in my apartment. Specifically, she was covering the kitchen table with crayons, markers, glitter, and what appeared to be an alarming amount of glue. When I got home that evening, she immediately shoved a folded poster board into my hands. "Don't bend it. That's usually a bad sign. It's a surprise." Children said the word surprise the way military commanders said incoming fire. I opened it carefully, then stared. The drawing covered nearly the entire poster board: a city skyline, a giant office building, a little apartment, several stick figures, and, naturally, a lighthouse. Always a lighthouse. "What's this?" Sarah looked offended. "It's obvious, of course. It's all the people who helped." My throat tightened unexpectedly. Near the center stood a stick figure wearing a crown. Evelyn. Beside her stood another figure holding a briefcase. "Me." Sarah pointed proudly. "See?" I smiled. "I see. The lighthouse is you." I blinked. "Me?" She nodded. "Because you help people find things." Children had a remarkable ability to say devastatingly kind things without realizing it. The next morning, the poster accidentally ended up in my briefcase, which was exactly how, 2 hours later, Evelyn Croft found herself standing inside her office, staring at a glitter-covered drawing made by an 8-year-old. "Why am I still wearing a crown?" she asked. I buried my face in my hands. "I don't know. I feel like we've discussed this." "We have." Evelyn studied the drawing again, then looked toward me. Something softer appeared in her expression. "Frame this one too." I laughed. "Of course." She smiled. Then the smile lingered, longer than usual, long enough for the room to become unexpectedly quiet. Outside the windows, the city continued moving. Meetings waited. Reports needed approval. Companies needed managing. Yet for one brief moment, none of it seemed particularly important. Finally, Evelyn looked away. "You know," she said softly, "I don't think Sarah sees me the way other people do." "No." I smiled. "She doesn't." Evelyn nodded, almost thoughtfully. "That's probably why I like talking to her." The words settled gently between us. Honest, unfiltered, real, and somewhere in that quiet office, I realized something had changed. Not suddenly, not dramatically, gradually, the way meaningful things usually changed. Months earlier, Evelyn Croft had been my employer. Then she became someone I respected, then someone I trusted. Somewhere along the way, she'd become something else too. Someone I cared about, deeply. The realization should have scared me. Instead, it felt strangely peaceful, because for the first time in a very long time, the future didn't feel like something to survive. It felt like something to look forward to. 6 months later, the city looked different. Not because the skyline had changed. Not because new buildings had appeared. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't constantly waiting for something terrible to happen. Sarah's asthma was under control. The medical bills no longer arrived like monthly threats. Rent got paid on time. My knee still hurt when it rained, but at 35 I'd decided that was less a problem and more a personality trait. Life wasn't perfect, it was simply stable, and after years of survival mode, stability felt miraculous. Apex Holdings continued thriving, revenue climbed, expansion projects succeeded. Investors remained happy. The board stopped trying to diagnose Evelyn through corporate memos. Even Richard Caldwell had finally accepted reality. He still disagreed with her occasionally. He just did it professionally now. Progress comes in many forms. On a bright Saturday morning in early spring, I stood near the finish line of a community charity run surrounded by hundreds of cheering spectators. Children raced across the park. Volunteers handed out water bottles. Music drifted from loudspeakers. The weather was perfect, which meant Sarah was determined to make the most of it. "There she is." Hayes pointed dramatically from beside me. Across the field, Sarah sprinted toward the finish line wearing a race bib nearly as large as her torso. 6 months ago, she would have struggled to jog around a school gym. Today, she looked unstoppable. The crowd erupted as she crossed the line. Sarah immediately threw both arms into the air like she'd just won an Olympic medal. "I did it," she shouted. I laughed so hard my chest hurt. "You did." A second later, she crashed into me with enough force to nearly knock me backward. Did you see? Everyone saw. She looked delighted. Which made sense. The entire point of finishing races was ensuring everyone knew about it. A few feet away, Evelyn watched with a smile that had become much easier to find lately. No boardroom expression, no corporate mask, just genuine happiness. Sarah spotted her instantly. Did you see too? Evelyn nodded. I did. I was fast. Very. Sarah placed both hands on her hips. I think I was the fastest. Hayes coughed loudly into his fist. You finished 17th. Sarah ignored him. Fastest. Evelyn nodded solemnly. Fastest. Hayes looked betrayed. Nobody cared. Later that afternoon, the four of us sat together beneath a large oak tree overlooking the harbor. The race had ended. The crowds were thinning. Boats drifted across the water under bright spring sunlight. For a while, nobody said much. The silence felt comfortable, familiar, earned. Sarah sat on the grass working on another drawing. Naturally, some things never changed. You know, Hayes said eventually, this is weird. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. How? Hayes gestured vaguely toward all of us. A year ago, Thomas was cleaning conference rooms. Fair point. He looked toward Evelyn. You threatened to fire 3 vice presidents before breakfast. Also fair. Then toward Sarah. And this one thought billionaires lived inside castles. Sarah looked up immediately. They should. Hayes sighed. That's exactly what I'm talking about. The harbor breeze carried laughter across the water. For a moment, I simply sat there taking everything in. The sunlight, the boats, the people, the simple fact that life felt good, not easy, good. There was a difference. Eventually, Sarah finished her drawing and proudly held it up. We all leaned closer. The picture showed a city skyline, a giant office building, a small apartment, a park, a finish line, and, of course, a lighthouse. Always a lighthouse. Near the center stood 4 figures. Me, Sarah, Hayes, Evelyn. This one has fewer crowns, I observed. Evelyn looked relieved. Thank God. Sarah pointed toward the lighthouse. It's different now. Evelyn studied the drawing. How? Sarah smiled. Nobody's lost anymore. Silence settled gently around us. Nobody laughed. Nobody made a joke. Because the truth was, she wasn't talking about the drawing. I looked toward the harbor. 6 months earlier, I was a janitor, terrified of losing everything. Evelyn was a billionaire carrying pain alone because she believed vulnerability was dangerous. Sarah was fighting for every breath. Somewhere between a wrong door, a medical brace, and a ridiculous crayon drawing, all of our lives had changed. Not because someone rescued us, because we stopped trying to survive by ourselves. The afternoon sunlight shimmered across the water. Boats moved slowly toward the harbor entrance. Families laughed in the distance. The world kept turning. Finally, Evelyn looked toward me. Her smile was quiet, warm, real, the kind that no longer disappeared after a second. Ready? She asked. I glanced toward Sarah, toward the harbor, toward the future, waiting somewhere beyond it all. Then I smiled back. Yeah, for the first time in a long time, I truly was. The end.